Okay.
There we go. When I hear scriptures like that one, I find myself thinking, context! What is all of that stuff about? So let me give you some sense of what that very short reading has to do with the 4th of July, with how we live as sane people in a kind of crazy world. We have to start with who the king was before Jeremiah. The king before Jeremiah was a young man named Josiah, and he was a terrific king. He started young, he had it right, everyone loved him, but when he died, it all changed. And suddenly, on a day in November, everything changed about everything changed about the nation of Israel. All of a sudden, instead of having a leader that they trusted and they understood, they had kind of a series of guys who were trying to be the leaders, but they didn't really have the right skills, and there was constant ferment going on all around them. It was the change from the Assyrians running the show to the Babylonians. So here was the real difference. The Assyrians really believed that you could leave people where they were, even if they were conquered, let them do their thing, and as long as they paid their taxes, it was all good. The Babylonians had a different strategy. The Babylonians did kind of a cherry pick of all the important leaders in a culture, and they brought them out of their own land and brought them back to Babylon, leaving their communities very weak and being a brain trust, essentially, for the Babylonians. Huge change. And remember, we don't think about the nation of Israel being as tiny and puny and helpless as it was. But these are people who had no choices. They were completely marginalized. So, in the midst of all this ferment, in the midst of being a country, think about being as small as one of those little European countries was during World War II, and watching the German and Japanese invasions and realizing that you have no say in what's going to go on here. That somebody else is going to have to determine your fate. That's where Israel was. And so there was this prophet Jeremiah, who comes onto the scene, and he's got only bad news. Basically, all he does is tell his folks, if you'd just been faithful to God, none of this stuff would have happened. Now, Hananiah, who's only mentioned once in this passage, and in fact only once in Scripture, Hananiah had a different idea of how to preach. And his idea of how to preach was to say, God got us through all these other things. God brought us over at the time of the Exodus. God got us through all this misery. So just trust. Eventually, God is going to get us over. So yes, this is where I'm going with this sermon. If I had a choice, I wouldn't be Jeremiah, the biblical prophet. I'd be Hananiah. But here's why it was so important for Jeremiah to say to his own people, if you don't change, things aren't going to go well. Because they really gave up. They were so helpless. They felt so marginalized. They just said, government, what can you do? You can't fight City Hall. We'll just wait for one of these big powers to take us over. And then whatever they decide to do, they can do. Jeremiah was determined that his own people not give up, that they keep fighting. Now, his idea of what they should be doing to fight would be a little different than yours and mine, likely. But it's important for us to remember that no matter how small and unable and helpless we feel sometimes, that we serve a God who does, in fact, have the power to bring the holy vessels back from Babylon. That's what Hananiah said. Hey, God brought us back before, God's going to bring us back again. But not just by sitting and waiting. And it's so tempting. It's so tempting right now when politics is so divisive. And even church feels divisive. I mean, you probably all have friends who are convinced that if the nation would just go back to the 1950s, everything would be fine. I always ask, fine for whom?
Right.
Yeah. Not for me, not for you, not for most of us, but for somebody it would be just ducky.
Let's do the 60s instead.
The 60s instead, yeah. It was more fun and the clothes were better. But the reality is, just going back to choose your decade, that's not going to work. And neither is it going to work for us to just kind of sit and say, oh, at some point, they'll fix it. It's so tempting. Because politics is so nasty right now. And even decisions about relatively simple things, zoning decisions in towns and, you know, deciding whether or not someone can have a license to run a business, even those things have gotten kind of nasty. And it's so tempting to just be with Hannah and I and say, well, you know, God will fix it, don't worry about it. We don't have to do anything. Well, yes, God will fix it. But we are the hands and feet of God. And in a country where so many people are so terrified of the future, where we all worry that we're going to lose our health care, that our friends who are not native to this country might end up getting deported. We worry all the time about what's going on. It's tempting to just say, I won't deal with it. But God needs us. And one of the things about the United Church of Christ is we may struggle to get our internal, like how we're going to organize ourselves fixed. But if there is somebody who's hurting, the United Church of Christ has always been there first. As a matter of fact, I have a sister-in-law who is hard to please, shall we say. She's the eldest. And when I met her, I was very nervous. Because I thought, oh gosh, I don't know if she's going to like me. Well, it turned out that I already came with a commendation by being United Church of Christ. Because years ago, in the community she lives in near a lake, there was a flood. And members of the local United Church of Christ went door to door saying to people, is there anything you need? Do you need water? Is everybody safe? Do you need us to call 911 for you? Such a simple thing. And yet, it had such a profound effect on my sister-in-law. She said, oh, you're from the United Church of Christ? Those people who really help? Yeah. You like me, huh? That willingness to be there, to stand with people when they can barely stand for themselves. That willingness to be the first to ordain a woman, to ordain somebody who's gay, to ordain a man of color. That willingness to be in that messiness that is political life. That's one of our hallmarks as the United Church of Christ. It is not easy. And it's frankly not very pretty. I mean, it looks really good when you're standing there at the press conference and you've got the banner out front and, you know, the president of the United Church of Christ is standing over there with you and you think, wow, this is great. In the previous 10 minutes, you were on the phone trying to get one of your colleagues to show up who didn't want to show up because somebody might not like it. Or trying to argue with someone who's from outside the community about what needs to happen at this press conference. I mean, it's not easy, but it's necessary. You have a particular voice in this community. People know you because you're the place that it's safe to be who you are. Now, not everybody, and Brandon agrees that that's good Christian theology, right? Yeah. And it would be tempting to say, oh, we don't have to do anything. We'll just wait for things to sort out. But the fact is, you are here because our forebears in the United Church of Christ believed that it was important to have a church like this. We all stand on the shoulders of people who were rejected for years and years and years in their home churches. People who were told, you should sit down, you don't know anything, you don't have the right education, you don't have the right credential, whatever it is, and who kept standing up and talking. Faithful people who walked with Cesar Chavez, people who did freedom rides, not in the glare of the cameras, but for years and years and years. People who, even more importantly, sat in meetings. Greater love hath no one than that they sit in a meeting for their friends. I know it's boring. Organizing stuff is boring. But it has to be done. We stand on the shoulders of people who are willing to do that so that we could be here. And now, just as there are Assyrians and Babylonians vying for what will be the soul of America, just as there are huge national powers that are vying for who's going to run the world, just when we think maybe ISIS might be contained, oh, but probably not. It's just messy. And the temptation is to sit with Hananiah and say, it's all right, God will take care of it. We really need both Hananiah and Jeremiah. God will take care of it in ways we could never have imagined. But God will take care of it by motivating us, by making sure that we are reminded to welcome the stranger, to be a place of refuge for immigrants, to say even to our neighbors when they say, well, I don't know, I don't think that group of people should have rights. We need to be the ones who say, oh yes, they do need to have rights. We all need to have rights. It would be easier if we were in a time where everybody agreed. I so wish that we had just one national voice, that somehow we could be at that stage where someone says, hey, let's all go in this direction, and all we need to do is go. But that's not where we are, and that's not where Jeremiah was. We are instead in this messy, complicated, confusing place where sometimes we don't know to whom we should listen. And like Hananiah and Jeremiah, we might disagree about what the right thing is to do. But we cannot afford to just wait and hope that someone else will decide. We need to be the ones who speak up for our neighbors. We need to be the ones who act. We need to be the ones, as hard as it is, who step out in faith and believe that the God who got us through all these other awful times will get us through even this. Amen. And may you have a blessed holiday week.